Hi, I'm Aimee Rebmann, and I'm so glad you've joined me to paint today. You're in for a great experience. Now, I want to let you know that I'll be painting at my pace, and that may not necessarily be your pace. So, the beauty of video is that you can push pause and catch up as you need to. You can also rewind and review a concept or a step that we've just gone over. There will also be drawing breaks, and that's a good time to catch up as well. Also, today's painting is really just inspiration, and it's my chance to guide you toward your own masterpiece. So I want you to create something that really speaks to you and make it your own in any way that you'd like to, whether it's just change a couple of colors or maybe add something else to the painting. Now, the most important thing here is to have fun. So, on that note, I'm going to suggest that you go throw on some of your favorite music, grab a refreshment, and let's get started. Cheers! We'll get started with our tulip painting by doing a little guideline sketch. So I've given you that starter sketch online as well, but basically we're just going to be going right over all of these lines. I've already done this for myself, and just giving ourselves kind of like this little feeling of the petals coming down, some of the roundness of our tulip in the background there, as well as, of course, on this one here as well. Now I want you to just do a very light pencil sketch. Don't worry about it being dark like this. I've done this only just so that you can see this a little bit more. And always work with a real light guideline sketch for yourself. That way then your pencil lines don't show through when you don't want them to. So, I wanted to show you also the beautiful tulips that I bought that were the inspiration for this painting. So, we'll get started by talking about the paint colors that we're using for this painting. And so we've got a chrome red or a bright red, and violet, ultramarine blue, a raw umber, green oxide, chrome yellow, and raw sienna, which is kind of a gold color. And then, of course, lots of white that we'll need as well. We'll begin painting by using our large flat brush, and again we're going to make sure that we get that nice and dried off on our paper towel, making sure that we're not chasing drips down our canvas or diluting our paint so much that it's requiring more layers than really is necessary. And we're going to be scooping up and loading our brush with plenty of white and a little of this raw sienna, that kind of gold color. And we're just going to be brushing this on. Now the direction of the brush strokes is not really that important because we actually want this to be kind of full of energy. And so I'm going to recommend that in this case, we're going to just keep on sliding that paint color on there. So we're just coming up with kind of a real warm white, kind of a little buttery. If you want to add a little touch of yellow in there, you can do that. So maybe I'll do just literally a little pinpoint on the edge of my brush of yellow, because yellow takes over really fast and it becomes very sunny. So note that I'm going right over those stems that I drew because we're going to get those back later. I'm not worried about that. And I'm going to just lay my brush on the edge of that line of the tulip that I drew on there with my pencil. And by laying it on the canvas and sliding it like this, you're going to maintain a fairly clean line. That's a real nice, easy way to maintain your shape that you're going around. And using this loading method, that eliminates the need for mixing a color on the palette that is exactly the same, all the way around. You get a little more energy, I think, to your painting if you just load your brush up and let those colors mingle on the canvas. So as you can see, I've got much more yellow up here, but I kind of like that. So I'm going to, maybe add a little more yellow in here and there around the rest of my canvas. But it doesn't have to, like I said, be the same everywhere. I kind of like that it's going to change up here and there. So the other thing that you want to do while you're getting this color onto your background is you want to get your side edges. So get that top edge, get your side edges, and don't worry about the underneath bottom edge at this time. Just do that in your own time at some point so that you have all of your edges finished. But right now you can go ahead and get that side edge done. So I'll get that all done as well. And very quickly, we're going to be adding in some of our purpley tones because I want it to add in a little bit while this is still a little bit wet. So we're going to kind of move through this and continuing to pick up some white, mainly white, with just a little bit of that raw sienna, maybe a little touch of that yellow if you like the yellow in there. And again, I'm just kind of swooshing this around. So I'm going to finish the rest of this later, but I'm going to show you what the next step is. So while it's still fairly wet, and I'm just not even going to wash my brush because it's mainly just white on there, I'm going to now take a little tiny bit, you can see just a little hint of purple and maybe a little hint of that red. And I have to tell you, red will take over your painting very quickly, so be very cautious with the red. So I'm actually going to kind of tap that off on the side of my plate to make sure I don't have too much red. I can always pick up more, but once I've got it on there, it's pretty tough to cover up. But having said that, remember that acrylic is a very forgiving paint, and so if I do get too much on and it's not quite what I want, I can just let everything dry and I can kind of rework my background again. So while this is still wet, do you see that I can get some really interesting little effects here? I'm just sort of going back and forth. You could use little swooshy swirls, whatever appeals to you. So have some fun with this and finish off your background, and then we'll come back in just a few minutes. So once you have your background, to a place where you're really liking it, of course you could have much more of your pinky purples in there if you'd like, but I would caution you to keep it fairly light, and let's get those colors into our tulips so that that really adds that contrast and lets those, that element really shine. So we're going to go ahead and add now onto our tulips, and we're going to stick with our large brush. So get that washed out real well. Scrape it off and all, as I've instructed you to in my getting started video there. And dry that off. And now, just as we did to create those kind of pinky purpley tones into the background, now we're going to take those colors and we're going to do a little bit of purple, a little bit of red, and let's say more purple than red because once again red just takes over really fast. And a little bit of your white again. And once again, we want to load our brush so that these colors mix and mingle on the canvas. That's going to give us all these wonderful, beautiful striations in the flower, and we're going to keep it from getting too flat that way. So I'm just going to work it in the shape of my flower here. Do you see those wonderful tones that are created by the brush? So I love that we're getting these interesting things happening so easily, letting the brush do the job for us here. So remember, don't mix those colors on your palette and then apply them, or you're going to have a very flat looking color. So now you can, if you don't like it to be that striated with color, you can always just brush over it more, and that will mellow that out. So I can take my brush and maybe go over some areas a little bit and kind of show you that. Do you see how that just harmonized those colors, and it's more or less as if I had kind of mixed it on my palette. But I like to allow some of that to just kind of stay the way that it ended up on my canvas there with the brush. So I'm going to take a touch more color. I'm not using a whole lot of paint right now, just a little bit on the tip of that large brush. And so once again, I'm going to follow the outside edge, and I'm going to keep following the shape of the flower. So I'm not going back and forth, I'm not going straight up and down. I'm following the shape of our object here. And so once again, just kind of going in like that. I'm going to take just a little hint of white because those tulips that I showed you, they had like a little white down here. Now I've got too much of my pinky purpley colors on my brush right now to really get it white. So I think what I'll do is I'll wait for that to dry and I can add in a little bit more of a white color there at the, where the stem and the flower meet. So I want to now differentiate the petals that are behind it by going just slightly darker. So I'm not going to use too much white this time. And that's going to keep them staying sort of in the background. I've got too much red there. And if you're feeling that, depending on the size that you drew your flowers, of course, and just your comfort level, you could always switch down to your medium flat brush. That's the next largest brush there, or next smaller, but the second largest. And you can always then just, kind of play with what brush feels comfortable for you. I'm comfortable with a large brush, and what you get from the larger brush is it's not going to be quite as streaky. So if you go down to a smaller brush, just know that it's going to get a little streakier with brush strokes. So I tend to use the largest brush for the job. So that's looking a little flat to me, but I'm going to vary that up in a little bit. And I think this time I've got too much red there, so I'm going to take just purple. And even though I took just purple, a little red is going to be combining there as well. And so again, I might kind of streak down into this area that's still wet and get that to soften up. So I'm going to kind of spread that out a little bit along that petal line. And again, I'm going to add some of that white at the base there again in just a little while. We're going to let that dry first. So I think I'm going to add just a touch more purple here. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on my bottom flower here. So once again, we're going to let that brush stroke just slide on there and create some beautiful things happening on our petals there. So I'll finish that up and you take some time and do the same, and we'll be right back to finish off our stems as well and get into those leaves. Those will take on some personality as well. So we'll be right back. Now, and I hope that you've enjoyed playing with getting some of those beautiful things happening on that first layer on our tulips. So let's now move on, and we're going to add in our stems and our leaves. And then we'll go back and we'll kind of do finishing touches onto our tulips that will bring that to life a bit more. So in this case, we're now going to move to our small round brush here. And the small round brush is going to be the smallest one in the brushes that I recommended. So notice that I wipe that handle about halfway up so that wherever it's sat in the water, it's not going to form this drip as I start to get my paints together. And just as I touch on my canvas, all of a sudden that little drip puddles onto the canvas. So you want to always dry that about halfway up on those small brushes because they have a tendency to do that. So good little tip for you there. So in this case, I want to get kind of a springy green because of course these are wonderful spring bulbs that are coming up all around us here in the spring. I happen to be developing this in the spring, so of course that's what inspired me. But I'm going to do some white and a little yellow and some green on my brush. And I'm going to just start here, and I'm going to lay my brush on it and slide. And I'm going to allow myself to go as quickly as possible with that. If you're having a hard time, another recommendation that I have for you is that you can bring it onto your lap And you have a lot more control if you just lay this on your lap and even put the side of your palm there on the canvas. And it's hard for me to do it here on the, show you on the video, but if you do that, you may have a little easier time with getting that line. Now, of course, we want this to be kind of a nice, gentle curve there. We don't want this to be super straight. That's kind of the beauty of tulips, is that they have these gentle curves. It's very graceful. So we want to capture that. And again, using a little white, a little yellow, a little green, and just let those colors mix on the canvas there, and you'll get your stem. I'll go ahead and do the other one as well. And again, in one big motion, map out where that stem is going to be. Then you can go back in and fine-tune that a bit. So I'm going to kind of go here, and I'll slide down. I have to tell you, doing it from the side angle is sometimes a little challenging, so I hope I'm doing this well for you. I'm sure you're doing beautifully. So let's get a little bit more of that going on there. And just kind of fine-tuning that stem. So I've made it a little bit wider down here, so I need to widen it up a little bit as I go up. Of course, I don't want to get too wide, but I want this to, look connected, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So if you found that you got a little wide in one spot, go ahead and just kind of make the whole thing pretty much that same width. Now, do you see that because we used the white, yellow, and green together on our brush and let them mix on the canvas, that's giving us already some really wonderful feelings of light and shadow happening. So allow that to happen. Don't let this get too flat by getting that color too well mixed. I'm going to widen this one out just a little bit as well so that they are a little bit more similar. And that should be good. I'm going to wipe that just a little bit there. There's another little trick for you, is go ahead and get it quick and you can get that off right away. So we've got our stems on there, but now we want to work with the leaves, and the leaves just add so much personality to a tulip. So for our leaves, we're going to actually use our small flat brush. So we want just a little bit more coverage. And we want to be able to use this brush. Once again, I'm drawing it halfway up the handle. We want to use this brush where we've got the width of the brush, and then we've also got like the sides and the tip of that brush. And so we're going to be actually, turning our brush, and sometimes trying to get little wisps by turning it so that we get the line of the brush after using the width of the brush. So let me demonstrate what I mean by that. Once again, I'm going to be using several colors. I'm going to do a little bit of my green, a little of that raw umber, that dark brown, and some of my ultramarine blue. And I want to get in some shadows first. So, let me turn those brushes so I don't catch one by accident. And I'm going to just work right from down here, and I'm going to just go up like that. And did you see how I went like this? And I turned my brush as I went. Now I think I may have maybe a little bit too much of my brown and blue, so I'm going to take a little bit more of my green, but we're going to be varying this up. We're mapping out a nice shadowy area of our leaf here. And we're just going to kind of map out the shapes of our leaves. So, now of course yours can go any which way. I'm just kind of making this up as I go myself. And so again, I want that feeling of wispiness. So then I can start to widen it out down here, because it's kind of a nice long spade of a, or kind of, I don't know what you would call it. Maybe it's more of a spear, but anyway, it's a nice long leaf. So I'm going to take some of my yellow and green, and I can get some other things happening on there. But do you see that with this now, we're seeing a little bit of our background showing through. Don't worry about that. This is just a first layer, and we're going to be adding to that. Right now, we're just mapping this out. So again, maybe a little brown and blue with my green. And I'm going to kind of look at my flowers that I've got over there. And again, I'm going to just create some fun things happening here. And go right over that stem that I just drew, or painted in, I should say. And we'll get that back. Yeah, maybe I'll kind of do one more. It's a little bit shorter here. We don't want them to all be the same length. That's another thing that really makes these all so interesting. So again, it's this kind of long, narrow thing that then starts to thicken up as it comes down. And it might come out like that. So that might be the leaves that I have that kind of correspond with that lower tulip. I'm going to do the same thing up here. So keep playing with this. And again, I'm going to just get some things happening in here. And a lot of this is based on just trying to create a really beautiful composition here. So I want some movement. So I'm placing the leaves in a way that will just add some beauty and grace to our composition. So don't worry if you're not getting them exactly where I'm getting them. You can make your own choices, or you can try to follow approximately where I'm putting mine. So again, I could even have them meet if they could overlap. So again, if it feels natural that it would overlap, go ahead and let those leaves overlap. If it makes some sense to have it stop, then you can have it stop before they meet. And I think I'll get some more coming from the base here. Maybe that kind of goes off the edge. I like things to go off the edge a bit. And if I do have something go off the edge, like I did over here with my tulip, I went ahead and just added that pinkish tone from my flower right onto my edge. You can have that wrap. So I'm going to do the same thing over here with my leaf. And if you prefer to have your image just stay on the front and have just a solid color all around on the edges, that certainly works too. I think I'll add one more in here that kind of overlaps here, comes down maybe. And I think that's gonna do it pretty well there. So, I'm gonna let that dry just a bit. And so if you're needing a bit more time, go ahead and push pause. But otherwise, go ahead and move on with me, and then we'll come back to our leaves and we're going to add more dimension to those in just a few minutes. So I'm going to continue working with the small flat brush, and therefore I'm washing that out real well, drying it off. And we're going to take just a little bit of that white on the tip of that brush. And remember I was saying that there was kind of a white base here on those tulips that I had bought and I'm enjoying. So I'm going to go ahead and add that white base in. the sides just a little bit. And you see, remember I told you there was like a little, curve there at the base where the stem meets the flower? I'm emphasizing that a bit, having this little bump of the white there. Now I'm going to take just a touch more white. I'm going to emphasize the little tips of my petals. So do you see now I'm using kind of a little shaky hand so I don't have a perfectly thick line. I don't want it to be too perfect. So instead I'm kind of going like this, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm emphasizing where those front petals are at. Again, it's just kind of a little shaky hand so that you get this sort of natural broken edge, if you will, or broken light sort of a feeling on the edge of those petals. Then I'm going to take a little bit, I don't even have to clean my brush, I'm just going to take a little bit of my purple and red. Again, you use whatever ratio you would like. If you like it more purple, use more purple, or more red, whatever you like. And I can do the same thing, and I'm going to kind of dab that in a little bit here and there. And I'm just going to keep adding a little bit so that we get a little more emphasis on all of the interaction, let's say, of the petals of these flowers. So I might add a little bit more in here. And if there are any areas that you feel just needed a little more work, let's say, like I felt in this area here, I can always now add that in. So I'm just going to keep going around and do, little emphasis of white, and then I can go back in, add a little bit more of my purples and my reds. I think I don't want this to be quite as different as it is up here, so I'm going to start mellowing that out and adding a little touch more of my white in there. So it's just this constant kind of push and pull sort of a thing. And so of course for you, it'll be based on your experience and what your eye likes as well, to either make adjustments or not. Maybe you really like how it went on that first time. So know that it's always just kind of this little journey of playing with it and seeing what you like. So earlier I had emphasized those back petals a little bit with a darker color, and that way then I could remember to kind of go back in and fuss with those a little bit more and maintain that feeling there of, that there are separate petals kind of all, forming this flower here. Emphasize that a little bit more. So again, you kind of play with that, see what you like. I'm going to do the same thing right down here. And again, I'm going to take some of my purples and red and shaky hands so that it's not a real heavy solid line. So kind of shaky in here. So again, I kind of emphasize that there was a petal right in there. And then I can go back and harmonize that a little bit and mellow out these separating lines. So as it starts to take on a little bit more dimension, just keep taking a step back away from your painting and get some perspective on it. It's really good to get some objectivity on your painting, because if you just stay, a foot away from your canvas or less the whole time, you can lose perspective and maybe not see the beauty of what you have on there, and you can lose it by going over it too much. Or maybe you don't really see what it needs. Maybe it's too flat, and as you step away from it, you see, oh gosh, I think I need to give myself a little more variation, some darks and lights, in order to emphasize that there's some depth here. So kind of going here again. So I'm just going to keep playing with this, And I'll take a look at it as well and see if there's something more that I need, since I've only seen this from, you know, a small perspective here. But we can go on and play with these leaves once again. So let's stay with this small flat brush again. And this time, I want to add a little bit more depth. So instead of doing the brown this time, because I really wanted to get some nice deep shadow, this time I'm going to let the shadows operate with just some of this ultramarine blue and green together. And I'm going to emphasize and just put a second layer now over some areas here of my leaves. So I'm kind of focused on the underneath area of the leaves. See there? And it'll also help to differentiate, you know, that this leaf and this leaf are different, especially when I get my lighter color on that you'll see in just a second. So I'm just going to keep kind of adding on one edge here, and again, I don't want it to be a perfect outline. I want it to kind of, you know, get thicker and then maybe come back in and just let it feel more natural here. So again, I'm using that dark blue and the green. And I'll show you the second step here on this flower so that you get that, and then you can play with it for a bit. And we'll kind of get these finished up. So now, once again, I don't even have to wash my brush because I'm working with the same colors. So I'm going to use some of my yellow now. Yellow with a little green. And I'm going to get more of a highlighted side. So do you see how now that's going to... I might add just a little touch of white as well. Because remember, we're working with kind of a real pretty springy green. And you do want to make sure that you add that yellow in, so it's yellow and green with a little white, because otherwise it's going to look minty if you don't add the yellow in. So a little bit of the yellow and white and green. And again, vary up these lines because we don't want it to look like just one side is this lighter green and one side is the darker green, and that they're pretty even down the center. We want some variation because the light is hitting this in different ways. So you can see now that we're getting some nice things happening on our leaves. So I'll be back in just a few minutes after I've had a chance to kind of step back, see if there's anything else to tell you about, and otherwise I think we're almost done with our painting. So I'm going to work on these other leaves, and like I said, if there's anything else that I see to, you know, have you consider, then I'll come back and let you know that. But have some fun working on your leaves, and we'll be right back. My finished leaves, so I hope that you've enjoyed doing yours. One thing that I found that I was doing that I'm not sure I told you about was that as I would do, you know, some of that more, the lighter color, the yellowy green on one side, sometimes I would just kind of touch it into my darker side. Same thing with my darker side, I would sometimes kind of touch it in a little bit to my lighter side. And that way then you don't get these real harsh differences. So you can see that it's a nice harmonious mingling of those colors. So the last thing that I noticed when I stepped away was that this little outline here, I didn't realize it being so close, but it's just a little too contrived looking. It doesn't look real natural. So I want to make that a little more natural. So I went back to my large brush that we had started with, and I'm going to take my original colors there. So that was the white and the purple, and that little touch of red. And I'm going to take just the tiniest bit on the tip of my brush here, and I'm going to kind of sweep away. I'm leaving a little bit of this, but I'm creating a much more natural feel so that it's not such a heavy line there. So you see that I'm sweeping out. So if you find that you've got sort of the same thing happening there, you can do this. So again, I'm going to soften that up a little bit. And if I feel like I totally lost it, I can always add more in. And again, it's not that that's a necessary element, it's just something that I noticed in the flowers that I had bought. So again, I'm just kind of softening that little white rim there that I put at the base there. And then one other thing that I really noticed was that some of this little kind of buttercream sort of a color was in the flowers too. And I think that's what had originally inspired me to use that as the background. So I'm going to go in and use a little of my white and that little tiny bit of that raw sienna and a little hint of yellow. And you see that I'm kind of tapping it off a little bit because I don't want too much paint on my brush. So now I have just a hint of those yellowy, white colors, those creamy colors on my brush. And I'm going to add just a little hint of it here and there into my petals. Now, one thing that I want to emphasize is I'm going to work from down and up, because that way then the bristles are going to give me kind of a nice feathery sort of a feel on the upstroke. So I'm going to just get myself a little hint of that here and there. And I want them to end in this nice feathery brush stroke. So do you see how that just gave this much more dimension? Look at the difference between those with just that one little addition. So amazing how Mother Nature just knows exactly what to do, right? To make things really beautiful and interesting. So once again, I'm going to kind of wipe it off on my brush, or on my plate I should say, so that I have very little paint on my brush. And I'm going to do the same thing maybe in here. Again, it's not like a real solid area, it's just sort of this little hint of color. And once again, I lay my brush on and I scoop it up, I slide it up, and I allow the brush to actually do the work for me there and giving me those nice feathery strokes. Now you're not going to get these feathery effects, that texture, if you've got too much paint on your brush. So once again, it's just a little hint of paint, and then you can kind of brush it off a little bit so that you have, the bristles of the brush actually being able to give you the texture of the texture of the brush on your canvas, let's say. So, a little there, maybe just a little hint there. And I think I've got it. So, I hope you've enjoyed painting the tulips with me today. I certainly have enjoyed the journey with you, and I hope you'll come paint with me again soon. Thanks so much.